The Panama Canal is a constructed waterway that connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans across the Isthmus of Panama. It is owned and administered by Panama, and it is 40 miles long from shoreline to shoreline. Ships can cross going in either direction, and it takes about 10 hours to get from one side to the other. Ships from any country are treated equally with respect to conditions of passage and tolls. Before the Panama Canal was built, ships traveling between the east and west coasts of the American continents had to go around Cape Horn in South America, a voyage that was some 8,000 nautical miles longer than going through the canal, and that took about 2 months to complete. All journeys between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans are shortened by thousands of nautical miles by going through the canal. But a new rival has now arrived that threatens to put the Panama Canal out of business. Keep watching as Elon Musk shows Mexico's $4.5 billion Panama Canal rival. Trust me, you do not want to miss this. The idea of the Panama Canal dates back to 1513, when the Spanish conquistador Vasco Núñez de Balboa first crossed the Isthmus of Panama. European powers soon noticed the possibility to dig a water passage between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans across this narrow land bridge between North and South America. The earliest proposal dates to 1534, when the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V ordered a survey for a route through the Americas in order to ease the voyage for ships traveling between Spain and Peru. In 1668, the English physician and philosopher Sir Thomas Browne specifically proposed the Isthmus of Panama as the most convenient place for such a canal. The first attempt actually to make the isthmus part of a trade route was the ill-fated Darien scheme, launched by the Kingdom of Scotland, which was abandoned because of the inhospitable conditions. In 1811, the German naturalist Alexander von Humboldt published an essay on the geography of the Spanish colonies in Central America, Essai politique sur le royaume de la Nouvelle Espagne, translated into English as Political Essay on the Kingdom of New Spain, containing researches relative to the geography of Mexico. In the essay, he considered 5 possible routes for a canal across Central America, including Panama, but concluded that the most promising location was across Nicaragua, traversing Lake Nicaragua. His recommendations influenced the British to attempt a canal across Nicaragua in 1843. Although this attempt in the end came to nothing, it resulted in the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty between the United Kingdom and the United States, in which the two nations bound each other to joint control of any canal built in Nicaragua or, by implication, anywhere in Central America. In 1846, the Mallarino-Bidlack Treaty, negotiated between the U.S. and New Granada, the predecessor of Colombia, granted the United States transit rights and the right to intervene militarily in the isthmus. In 1848, the discovery of gold in California created a demand for a crossing of Panama as a practical route between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. This demand was exploited by American businessman William Henry Aspinwall, who ran steamship legs from New York City to Panama, and from Panama to California, with an overland portage through Panama. This route was soon exploited by other businessmen, such as Cornelius Vanderbilt. Between 1850 and 1855, a syndicate founded by Aspinwall built a railroad, now the Panama Canal Railway, from Colon on the Caribbean Sea to Panama City. The project cost $8 million, 6 times the estimated cost, and between 6,000 and 12,000 of construction workers succumbed to tropical diseases. However, the railroad soon became immensely profitable for its owners. In 1870, U.S. President Grant established an Interoceanic Canal Commission, which commissioned several naval officers, including Commander Thomas Oliver Selfridge, Jr., to investigate the possible routes suggested by Humboldt for a canal across Central America. The commission decided in favor of Nicaragua, establishing this as the preferred route amongst American policymakers. By the 1930s, water supply became an issue for the canal, prompting the construction of the Madden Dam across the Chagres River above Gatun Lake. Completed in 1935, the dam created Madden Lake, later Lake Alajula, which provides additional water storage for the canal. In 1939, construction began on a further major improvement, a new set of locks large enough to carry the larger warships that the United States was building at the time and planned to continue building. The work proceeded for several years, and significant excavation was carried out on the new approach channels, but the project was cancelled after World War II. After World War II, U.S. control of the canal and the canal zone surrounding it became contentious, relations between Panama and the United States became increasingly tense. Many Panamanians felt that the zone rightfully belonged to Panama, student protests were met by the fencing in of the zone and an increased military presence there. Demands for the United States to hand over the canal to Panama increased after the Suez Crisis in 1956, when the United States used financial and diplomatic pressure to force France and the UK to abandon their attempt to retake control of the Suez Canal, previously nationalized by the Nasser regime in Egypt. Panamanian unrest culminated in riots on Martyrs' Day, 9 January 1964, when about 20 Panamanians and 3 to 5 US soldiers were slain. A decade later, in 1974, negotiations toward a settlement began and resulted in the Torrijos-Carter treaties. On 7 September 1977, the treaty was signed by President of the United States Jimmy Carter and Omar Torrijos, de facto leader of Panama. This mobilized the process of granting the Panamanians free control of the canal so long as Panama signed a treaty guaranteeing the permanent neutrality of the canal. The treaty led to full Panamanian control effective at noon on 31 December 1999, and the Panama Canal Authority assumed command of the waterway. The Panama Canal remains one of the chief revenue sources for Panama. Before this handover, the government of Panama held an international bid to negotiate a 25-year contract for the operation of the container shipping ports located at the canal's Atlantic and Pacific outlets. The contract was not affiliated with the ACP or Panama Canal operations and was won by the firm Hutchison Whampoa, a Hong Kong-based shipping interest owned by Li Ka-shing. On 21 December 2024, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump asserted that the United States should retake control of the Panama Canal from Panama, claiming that the rates Panama was charging American ships were exorbitant and in violation of the Torrijos-Carter treaties. The following day, he claimed that the canal was falling into the wrong hands, referring to China. Shortly afterwards, Panamanian President José Raúl Mulino responded, denying that the United States was being unfairly charged or that anyone besides Panama was in full control of the canal, and affirming that the canal was part of the country's inalienable patrimony. On 24 December, a protest was held at the U.S. Embassy in Panama City over Trump's threat to take back the Panama Canal. Protesters referred to him as a public enemy of Panama. On the same day, the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our America, made up of 10 Central and South American countries, denounced Trump's comments and affirmed its support for Panama's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and self-determination. On 7 January 2025, Trump, in a press conference, vowed to gain control of the Panama Canal. He refused to rule out economic and military action against Panama to seize control of the canal, to secure what he called U.S. economic security. He reiterated his intent to take back control of the canal in his inaugural address on 20 January. But despite the canal's fame, it faced troubles as well. Opponents to the 1977 Torrijos-Carter treaties feared that efficiency and maintenance would suffer following the U.S. withdrawal from the Panama Canal Zone. However, this has been proven not to be the case. In 2004, it was reported that canal operations, capitalizing on practices developed during the American administration, were improving under Panamanian control. Canal waters time, the average time it takes a vessel to navigate the canal, including waiting time, is a key measure of efficiency. In the first decade of the 2000s, it ranged between 20 and 30 hours, according to the ACP. The accident rate has also not changed appreciably in the past decade, varying between 10 and 30 accidents each year, from about 14,000 total annual transits. An official accident is one in which a formal investigation is requested and conducted. Increasing volumes of imports from Asia, which previously landed on U.S. West Coast ports, are now passing through the canal to the American East Coast. The total number of ocean-going transits increased from 11,725 in 2003 to 13,233 in 2007, falling to 12,855 in 2009. The canal's fiscal year runs from October through September. This has been coupled with a steady rise in average ship size and in the numbers of Panamax vessels passing through the canal, so that the total tonnage carried rose from 227.9 million UMS tons in fiscal year 1999 to a then record high of 312.9 million tons in 2007, and falling to 299.1 million tons in 2009. Leading to worries among many, but it soon evened out. In the first decade after the transfer to Panamanian control, the Panama Canal Authority invested nearly $1 billion in widening and modernizing the canal, with the aim of increasing capacity by 20%. The ACP cites a number of major improvements, including the widening and straightening of the Culebra Cut to reduce restrictions on passing vessels, the deepening of the navigational channel in Gatun Lake to reduce draft restrictions and improve water supply, and the deepening of the Atlantic and Pacific entrances to the canal. This is supported by new equipment, such as a new drill barge and suction dredger, and an increase of the tugboat fleet by 20%. In addition, improvements have been made to the canal's operating machinery, including an increased and improved tug locomotive fleet, the replacement of more than 16 km of locomotive track, and new lock machinery controls. Improvements have been made to the traffic management system to allow more efficient control over ships in the canal. In December 2010, record-breaking rains caused a 17-hour closure of the canal. This was the first closure since the U.S. invasion of Panama in 1989. The rains also caused an access road to the Centenario Bridge to collapse. Gatun Lake is filled with rainwater, and the lake accumulates excess water during wet months. For the old locks, water is lost to the oceans at a rate of 101,000 cubic meters per downward lock movement. The ship's submerged volume is not relevant to this amount of water. During the dry season, when there is less rainfall, there is also a shortage of water in Gatun Lake. As a signatory to the 2000 United Nations Global Compact and member of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, the ACP developed an environmentally and socially sustainable program for expansion, which protects the aquatic and terrestrial resources of the canal watershed. The expansion uses 3 water-saving basins at each new lock, diminishing water loss. It also preserves freshwater resources along the waterway by reusing 60% of water from the basins in the locks in each transit. The mean sea level at the Pacific side is about 20 cm higher than that of the Atlantic side due to differences in ocean conditions such as water density and weather. The 2015 to 2016 fiscal year was one of the driest periods on record, restricting ships' passage. 2019 was the 5th driest year for 70 years. Temperature rise has also caused an increase in evaporation. In normal times, 36 ships can transit the canal each day, but in early December 2023, ships were backing up because only 22 ships per day could transit due to low water levels. In January 2024, 24 ships per day were allowed to transit. With such troubles, the 100-year-old Panama rival finally got the chance to shine. The Mexico-Panama rival Elon Musk revealed that Mexico is constructing an interoceanic corridor railway to provide an alternative to the Panama Canal and ease international trade. The railway aims to alleviate the strain on the Panama Canal, which is struggling with low water levels due to a prolonged drought. The canal has raised toll prices significantly, and with water levels at an all-time low, shipping through the canal has become increasingly difficult. The $7.5 billion project spans 188 miles across the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, offering a route for containers to be transferred from ships to trains and then transported to the opposite coast for reloading onto ships to complete their journeys. This initiative revives an old project. The railway was originally opened in 1907 but was abandoned after the Panama Canal became operational. The interoceanic corridor is also intended to address poverty in Mexico. Running through the states of Veracruz and Oaxaca, both of which face high poverty rates, the project is expected to attract investment and improve local infrastructure. The railway will have 10 stops across the 2 states, with ports on both the Atlantic and Pacific coasts. The plan also includes the possibility of linking the corridor to the Tren Maya, extending the network to Cancun. The Mexican government has invested $6 billion in the project, with an additional $2 billion coming from private investors. For over a century, the Panama Canal has been the main route for global trade between the West and East, cutting shipping distances by thousands of miles. However, the canal is facing challenges due to recent droughts, which have caused water levels in Lake Gatun, essential for the canal's lock system, to drop significantly. As a result, ships are often left waiting at sea for up to 2 weeks, or they must pay high fees to bypass the line. Mexico's interoceanic corridor offers an alternative, potentially allowing companies to avoid the delays and rising costs associated with the Panama Canal. However, it remains uncertain if the corridor will be faster, as time will be needed to transfer cargo between ships and trains. Additionally, trains cannot carry as much cargo as shipping vessels, which could limit the amount of goods transported by rail. In response to this new competition, the Panama Canal Authority stated, "This route remains the top choice for shippers because the Panama Canal offers expedited access to more than 180 maritime routes connecting 170 countries via 1,970 ports. We are always monitoring potential projects that could compete with our route, but we remain confident in our service and are investing in strengthening our capabilities for the future." Despite these challenges, the interoceanic corridor is expected to ease the pressure on the Panama Canal, potentially handling around 5% of the cargo that would otherwise pass through the canal. Plans to connect these two oceans through the Isthmus of Tehuantepec had existed since the colonial period in the 16th century, with plans to build a canal or highway in the site being considered, but never successfully executed. As early as the first half of that century, during the early years of the existence of the Viceroyalty of New Spain, the Spanish colony which is now Mexico, the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés had already expressed his interest in creating communication between the two oceans in his letters to Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, though this doesn't necessarily mean he conceived the idea of using the isthmus for this purpose. Due to the short distance between the two oceans in this area, the potential for the creation of such a project had been attractive to various global powers, including Spain, Britain, France, the Netherlands, and finally the United States, as it would have saved cost and time. During the 19th century, when the Cape Horn route was the only seaway to the other side of the Americas, a canal would have reduced the risk to lives and cargo ships were frequently lost around the Horn. Alexander von Humboldt wrote in his political essay on the Kingdom of New Spain, published in 1811, that the Isthmus of Tehuantepec was ideal for the creation of a canal to connect the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, due to the proximity between the ports of Vera Cruz and Tehuantepec, finding that the isthmus between them is the narrowest point between the two oceans in New Spain, and due to the proximity of the sources of the Coatzacoalcos and Chimalapa rivers, which discharge into the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific Ocean respectively. In the essay, he mentioned multiple points in the Spanish Americas where the two oceans could be connected, including the Isthmus of Panama, belonging to the Viceroyalty of New Granada, remarking the fact that Vasco Núñez de Balboa successfully crossed it as early as 1513, several years before Mexico was conquered by Spain. However, since then, at the time of the work's publication, no survey of the region nor the determination of its exact geographic position had been made, despite propositions being made since 1528 suggesting cutting that isthmus and joining the sources of local rivers. Indeed, he also remarked that Viceroy Juan Vicente de Guimes, second Count of Revillagigedo, has been for a long time occupied in the project of the creation of such a canal, and that land-based roads had been opened in the isthmus since the late 18th century, which created commercial communication between the two oceans. These roads were used, he remarked, to transport the most precious of all known indigos, the indigo from Guatemala, then a kingdom belonging to New Spain covering much of Central America, bordering Panama. Though, according to Humboldt, it depends very little on the Viceroy of New Spain, and cacao from Guayaquil, in modern-day Ecuador, then part of the Real Audiencia de Quito, to Acapulco and, from there, to Vera Cruz to be sent to Europe, so as to avoid the dangers and difficulties of navigation to and through Cape Horn. He remarked in the essay the natural beauty and rich resources of the Intendancy of Oaxaca, where Tehuantepec is located, and stated that the port will become one day of great consequence when navigation in general, and especially the transport of the indigo of Guatemala, shall become more frequent by the Rio Guasacualco. In 1774, the Spanish authorities conducted geological research in the isthmus and issued a decree allowing their colony to create a canal in 1814. But this would not occur until Mexico became an independent country in 1821. Shortly after the independence, the Mexican government conducted its own surveys in the region, which resulted in the survey teams proposing the idea of the construction of a railroad, though this wasn't done due to Mexico's economic crisis of this period. Now, with drought at the Panama Canal and conflicts in the Red Sea and other global shipping lanes disrupting trade, officials in Mexico predict a golden opportunity for the country's $2.8 billion Isthmus of Tehuantepec's Interoceanic Corridor (CIIT) project. The initiative is converting the isthmus in southern Mexico, which represents the shortest distance between the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific Ocean in the country, into a 188-mile rail. The corridor could handle up to 1.4 million 20-foot equivalent units annually by 2033. The project could transform the Isthmus of Tehuantepec into a hub for global trade, Mexican authorities said. The Isthmus of Tehuantepec dry corridor offers a promising alternative to traditional routes like the Panama and Suez canals, Oliver Kontler, the Trade and Economy Director for the Mexican Embassy in Germany, recently blogged on LinkedIn. By leveraging its geographic advantage, Mexico has the potential to become a major logistics hub, serving not only North America but the global economy. Kontler said investments in technology will be key to the CIIT project's viability. The success of the project critically depends on the implementation of cutting-edge technology at the ports of Coatzacoalcos and Salina Cruz, as well as on the railways, Kontler said. This technology must be capable of handling and transporting an immense volume of containers efficiently, ensuring seamless movement between the ports. Achieving this goal requires collaboration between the government and the private sector. While Mexican authorities are bullish on the CIIT's prospects, global logistics operators said they are skeptical it could ever replace or even compete with the Panama Canal, which handles about 14,000 vessels and 8 million TEUs annually. The challenge really is that the Panama Canal is about 50 miles long, and the railroad to get from the Pacific to the Gulf is around 200 miles, so it's a much longer track, Pawan Joshi, Executive Vice President of Products and Strategy at E2Open, told FreightWaves. Another challenge, how many containers can the railroad move? It's also about the ports on either end, whether they're able to unload those containers, do they have the appropriate infrastructure? Austin, Texas-based E2Open is a supply chain software provider. E2Open's cloud-native global platform for supply chains connects more than 480,000 manufacturing, logistics, channel, and distribution partners in multi-enterprise networks tracking over 15 billion transactions annually. Joshi said the CIIT project could offer another option when global disruptions or droughts interrupt trade flows. At the least it provides an alternative, and I think a lot of companies are looking to that, Joshi said. The Canadian Pacific Kansas City Southern Railroad is looking to start to invest some money on the Panama side to build more infrastructure and provide an alternative. Joshi said for the CIIT project to become a viable complement to the Panama Canal, Mexico, the US, and other countries need to cooperate and invest in technology, infrastructure, and planning in the region. I think there has to be coordination, not just with the Panama Canal authorities or the Mexican railroad authorities. I think there should also be cooperation between the origin and destination ports and the ocean liners, Joshi said. It's important for countries like China and the US to make sure that trade routes continue to operate and it's profitable. Joshi also said more cooperation between shippers and global port facilities could benefit shipping and transportation lanes around the world. If I can take 10%, 15%, or 20% of the traffic that is going through the Panama Canal headed to Houston and actually move it intermodal using rail, by docking the ship in Long Beach and moving it over rail car, then all of a sudden, the viability of the Port of Houston starts changing, Joshi said. There's a lot of cooperation that is needed and coordination that is needed. I have a strong belief that if all the stakeholders come together, you will come up with a much better solution and a much more efficient, faster, effective and much more profitable solution for everyone. But this wasn't the only possible solution. A third option, the Panama Canal is essential to global trade, but a recent drought has left large numbers of ships waiting to pass along it, raising questions about whether an alternative route between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans is needed. It is a traffic jam on a colossal scale. More than 200 ships, according to some estimates, float there, just waiting. Some are loaded with containers stuffed full of items including furniture, consumer goods or building materials. Some carry oil or gas. Others are transporting grain. They are all due to travel through one of the world's most famous bottlenecks, a vital gateway for global shipping, the Panama Canal. A highly unusual drought, right in the middle of Panama's supposed wet season, has lowered water levels in two reservoirs that supply the canal. As a result, operators have had to restrict the size and number of ships that pass through its system of locks each day. In our just-in-time global economy, the markets trading these goods can't wait for long. An estimated $270 worth of cargo passes along the canal each year en route to over 170 countries. Some of the ships have already chosen to take day tours in a bid to avoid the delays. It's unprecedented, and it's a cause for concern, says Michelle Weiss-Bockmann, senior analyst at global maritime trade experts Lloyd's List Intelligence. The situation, she explains, could push up freight costs, especially for fuels such as liquefied natural gas, potentially affecting consumer prices. It's at times like this that old ideas tend to resurface. What if there were another way to get from the Pacific to the Atlantic via ship? In the early 1900s, the United States had two options: build a canal across Nicaragua, or through Panama. The U.S. Senate voted for the Panama option. It was a relatively easy choice. The route was shorter and, unlike Nicaragua, there wasn't a string of active volcanoes in the way to contend with. And yet the idea of a Nicaraguan canal has never gone away. Just a decade ago, a Chinese businessman championed a huge project that intended to build such a canal by the end of the 2010s. Despite much fanfare, it never materialized. But the crippling drought now affecting the Panama Canal, and the threat of additional climate change-related water supply issues in the coming years, has prompted some to question whether a second canal in Nicaragua or routes through other nearby Central American countries might not be such a bad idea after all. It is technically feasible, says Jean-Paul Rodrigue at Hofstra University, who has studied the long history of discussions around building a Nicaraguan canal. But there are many obstacles. The problem is the distances involved are much longer, significantly longer, he says. Any such route would likely take the form of two canals linking Lake Nicaragua to the Pacific in the west, and to the Atlantic in the east. One of these canals would be around 15 miles long and the other, connecting to the Atlantic, would be even longer, around 60 miles. The Panama Canal, which itself comprises the artificial Lake Gatun in its middle, has a total length of 50 miles. It lies along the Isthmus of Panama, the narrowest section of land that separates the Pacific Ocean from the Caribbean Sea in the Atlantic Ocean. So what do you think about the new rival to the Panama Canal? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below.